Welcome to Hackon Online. We've had some technical issues, so this will be mostly a Q&A session. So that means on your right-hand side, you have the opportunity to ask Matt questions. And please use that opportunity when you have an expert here to answer them. Welcome to us, Matt.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. For the attendees out there, really apologize for an unfortunate reason. That I don't understand. It's not letting me screen share on this platform. I don't know if it's because I'm using Linux. I've checked all the privacy settings I can possibly think to check. Yeah, unfortunately, it's just not worked out. This talk is really a live demo heavy presentation. So there are slides available for whatever you might get out of those. If you go to slides.dfirmat.com, that'll take you to my GitHub repo where you may download them. And so what's been proposed is, in lieu of the technical problems here, we will do live Q&A. So if anybody has questions about incident response, feel free to ask. For those who aren't following me on Twitter, you may do so at C3RKAH. With that, I will open up the floor to any questions.
Regarding the poll we had, are you an incident responder? Most of the people attending to the session now are not an incident responder, almost 53%. And there's 26% aspiring to be one, and only 21% have answered yes to that questions.
Okay, well, I like the aspiring to be one. That's always encouraging when people reach out to me and tell me that they're interested. That's music to my ears. With these talks I've been doing on incident response, I always hope to do that. I do have a question here for Windows systems. Do you have a preferred tool or tools or process? So incident response on Windows, I would tell people, regardless of OS, know where your logs are on a Windows system. I believe they're under the C Windows. I think it's System 32 WinEVT logs folder. Look for the EVTX files. If you need to pull those off, the base 4 logs that have been in Windows are application, system setup, and security. There are a lot of others if they're enabled. Sometimes they can be helpful. Usually the hints I look for, whether a log might be useful or not, aside from the name, is to see when the modified date was. If it looks like it's being updated, it might be, there's a good likelihood it's enabled. And then also checking the size of the log file. If it looks like it's not the default size, it's a good option. So really with any OS, looking at the logs is definitely important to do. And so in terms of preferred tools, processes, what I tell people is if you have an EDR solution, by all means use that. And in lieu of that, if you don't have an EDR tool, or if you're looking to supplement that, I recommend grabbing the SRUM database, srub.db, and using SRUMDump2. It's an open source application that you can use to essentially process that file. And the way that works in Windows is basically it's used really by the OS to track reliability, problems, those sort of things. But it's also handy for showing people execution, and it can tie that into users, processes, timestamp it. So those are some very useful tools if you don't have a commercial EDR solution, or one of the challenges you run into in any operating system in Windows tends to be very verbose logging, is all of your logs are first in, first out. So sometimes if you're trying to go back and look at historical information, it cycles out. I've seen the same thing really happen with some EDR tools, just depending where the data is stored. And so in some cases, the SRUM database will hang on to things longer than you might have in logs, you might have elsewhere. Another common thing is to look for execution on a Windows OS. And so there's a number of ways you can do that. We talked about SRUM database. It can certainly do that. Also, if you look under the C Windows prefetch folder, whenever an executable file executes on a Windows host, it creates a .pf file inside of that folder. And so really it's for the operating system to cache things that have executed. So the next time they run, it knows where to pull them from disk and really speed things up on the OS. But we can use that in incident response to get an idea if something actually executed and ran on the host OS or not. So those are some, quick hitting good processes off the top of my head. So, and the other thing is, typically when you're doing incident response, if it's, something that may have happened that's browser related, you can always look at the browser database. You can use virtually any SQLite database viewer or browser application to do that. And so, you can essentially do an internet search for the location of that file. And typically your Chromium-based browsers like Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, it's typically where you can find that. Different browsers, a little different location, maybe even a little bit different process, but you can usually look that information up online and find it. And that's good, on a Windows host, Linux host, Mac host, pretty much universally. So hopefully that's helpful. If there's any specific questions about any of that or other questions, feel free to ask. But that's a good one. Thank you.
Since a lot of companies don't have an IR team at all, what would you recommend them to do? How should they start out?
So I guess the question is, sometimes it's how big an organization is and whether or not they actually want to spin up an IR program. What a lot of smaller businesses and even some medium-sized businesses opt to do is find an MSSP that they can hire, essentially a third-party organization to basically set up the monitoring within their environment and do that. So, the other options are if you have, a wears all the hats security person, you can have them do that. If you start deploying, things like EDR solutions, centralized logging with a SIM becomes important. If you can look at technologies like SOAR for security orchestration, automation, and response, that can also, be helpful. You have to be kind of careful if somebody's doing all the things, like it's sort of important, when it comes to incident response, to make sure that the person has enough bandwidth where they can really look at things that are especially things that are rated critical or high. There's also some great commercial behavior analytics type engines, UEBA stuff that will look for things that are potentially concerning or bad and report those in. So those are typically the options. The other thing, which is going to be hard to do always, if you're up to a challenge and you're going to spin up an internal incident response team, having a security operations center SOC group that's going to do that stuff. And then typically those are, what I talked about earlier, are the kinds of solutions that organizations will want to try and use. So hopefully that's an adequate answer, but if not, let me know. I have another question here from the chat. You always have to know the attacker's threat profile and techniques, like using MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base before you start investigating, or does it help? And are the TTPs in the attack framework always correct? So there's a lot to unpack there. I would say specifically with regards to MITRE ATT&CK framework, it's a great resource and a great reference. And really, those are the kinds of things that a lot of organizations standardize on. It's a great framework for that, for detecting bad things within your environment. And it's also great, not just for starting out, but also improving the maturity of your security program, because you can essentially look at the table and figure out, okay, what are we detecting? You can use it to identify gaps in your security profile. So as you continue to mature your security programs in an organization, it's a great resource that you have readily available. And so I'm a big fan of MITRE ATT&CK framework. I can't think of anybody I've talked to that isn't. So in terms of, are the TTPs and the framework always correct? I find they're pretty darn good. What happens in the real world, though, is that threat actors are continually shifting their tactics and the tools they use. And so it's one of those things where things keep changing. Now, what I like about the MITRE ATT&CK framework as well is it's very well maintained. So the folks at MITRE do a very good job of keeping that up to date. That doesn't mean that you couldn't have something brand new that hasn't been updated into that yet. So in terms of knowing the attacker's threat profile, there's some good things for that. If you're looking for testing activity in an environment, you can basically use things like my friend George Archiles has a great tool called the C2 matrix that you can use to sort of figure out what threat actors are using, specific groups. And again, what we see is that different threat actor groups will continually change their tactics and adapt. So one of the more recent examples to that I can think of, and it's been kind of newsworthy, so this may not be new information, but Microsoft has disabled macros sort of running by default within their Office suite applications. And so that makes it a little more challenging for threat actors then to payload an Excel spreadsheet, for example, with macro-based malware, or at the very least something that then gets multi-stage and downloads, executes other applications, other malware to further infect the system. But since that attack vector has gotten more difficult for threat actors, they have resorted now to essentially putting malicious payloads inside of OneNote email attachments. So what happens is they create a OneNote, they embed an executable in there, and then they use social engineering to put like a button or an icon that looks like a button, and they'll kind of blur out the background. It might look like an Excel spreadsheet or look like it has important information, but you can't tell because it's super fuzzy, and it's intentionally meant to trick people into thinking they need to click this button to see what the content is. Once that's clicked, now the system is executing malware on it. And so that's just a very recent example of the resourcefulness of threat actors and the things that they're doing. And so, yeah, and again, I fully expect those kinds of things to make their way into MITRE. But, at a certain point in time, when that first started happening, it sort of became a new attack vector that was unknown. And it's sort of the shifting tactics and when you venture into the unknown. So hopefully that answers the question. Are there any open source tools for investigating possible breaches or suspicious activity, good or better than proprietary ones? To be honest with you, I've worked in enterprise environments for a very long time. I am a big fan of open source for investigating things. A large part of what is in my talk are things that are built into Linux, and things that are readily available. So what I like to tell people is strings. And if I could have gotten screen sharing to work, I would have had strings up. I'll see if I can go to that portion here within the slide deck. Go past some of that. So yeah, strings, it's built into Linux, and you can also download, the Windows version of that. Hashing files is built into Linux. It's also built into PowerShell. I've actually got a talk coming up where I'm going to, basically demo that and a whole lot of other things you can do in PowerShell to sort of collect digital forensic artifacts from a host. Checking EXIF data is something very simple to do in Windows and Linux type operating systems, Unix type operating systems. I like the Perl EXIF tool. Does a great job at that. Let me see what else I have here. So yeah, curl wget I've used, and again, if I could have pulled this, if I could have actually screen shared, everybody would have seen live demos of that. A tool I'm a big fan of is CyberChef, which is an open source free web application that anybody can download. You can run it on your local machines, and what's really cool with CyberChef is it does a whole lot of different things. You can, for example, timestamp things, convert timestamps. You can use it to, analyze files. You can decompress things. You can look at images. You can get the EXIF data. You can also do strings inside of CyberChef. And it does really just a ton of different things. There's a lot of functions in there. You can string them together to essentially build entire recipes that are just different functions that'll do different things. You can, use it to, again, deflate files. You can look for, artifacts. You can do substitutions. You can use it to essentially decode things. They have a magic function in that tool that'll attempt to identify something, but you can also, use it to look for magic bytes and magic headers, which within files tell you what kind of file type it is. If you're looking in a text editor, or if you're looking in a, if you're looking in the ASCII output table of a hex editor, you can find those. So hopefully those are some good tools that I recommend. Also, really anything, there's a number of Linux distributions that are great for, sort of looking at bad things. And so one of them is the Sans Sift workstation. The other is Remnux, which is great for reverse engineering malware. And the cool thing with those is you can install Remnux tools in Sift. You can install Sift tools in Remnux and really kind of have the best of both worlds. There is a version of Linux called CSI Linux, which is got a lot of great tools in it as well. And so that's great when you're looking at things, you're doing static analysis. Sometimes though you need to do dynamic analysis, and the only way you can really see exactly what's happening with Windows malware, for example, is to run them on a Linux host. It's not open source, but FireEye has the Flare VM that you can download. And the reason I talk about these distributions is because they have great tools in them. So take a look at those tools that are in those different distributions, because those are the kinds of open source things that you can use for investigating. And the better you get with using those tools, the better your toolkit is. And so even with what I do now and all the commercial tools I have access to, and those are usually my, where I try to go first. A lot of times I find myself supplementing investigations using a lot of those kinds of open source tools and some of those distributions. So hopefully that's helpful advice for folks.
I did put out another poll while you were talking, Matt, and I did ask the number of people in the organization they are working in that are working with either incident response or IT security. And it seems like for most of the companies, there are less than 5 people working with incident response and IT security. So not that many.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging because good people are very hard to find, and it's hard to hire people. And what I found are that a lot of people that we've talked to and interviewed where I work, it's hard to find people that have really focused on incident response. So we get a lot of great candidates, and so it definitely becomes again, just a challenge finding good people sometimes. But and again, it's hard to build out a SOC and hire for that. I think that's why a lot of people look for a quality MSSP that kind of comes highly recommended. And what I'd advise anybody is they should be willing to share. A customer, set up a meeting with one of their customers to have a one-on-one conversation and get a feel for how they are, and hopefully they would be willing to set that up with more than one customer, just so you can get different perspectives, find out what they're good at, what you wish they could do. But also, we do a really good job in the industry, I think, of preparing people for offensive security stuff, in terms of just when I see colleges, when I see a lot of courses, when I see a lot of learning platforms, tends to be geared towards offensive security stuff. The funny thing about that is that there are only really so many offensive security job openings at any given time. So it's very hard to get hired in as a pen tester unless you have a lot of experience. And the same thing with a red team. Those can be challenging. What I tell people, though, with incident response is that those offensive security skills help you with incident response. So if you have a great offensive security background, you're maybe having trouble breaking into the industry, give incident response a look, because what you learn by doing offensive security, and something I encourage everyone to do, is you learn what the different tools are, you learn how they work, and then you understand how and why they're used. And if you're looking at it from both sides of the equation, you then start to understand the forensic artifacts that are left behind when those tools are run. You get good at looking at user agent strings, and a lot of times what you see within attacks will give you a good idea of just how sophisticated the actor is. For example, are they launching attacks that would only work on a Windows OS, targeting a Windows OS, or are they just throwing everything, including Linux things that would have no chance of working, or vice versa? They're throwing Windows attacks at Linux and it's a spray and pray thing. Are they taking the time to change user agent strings on some of the tools? Have they actually configured Nmap so that NSE doesn't just blast out that it's Nmap scripting engine and leaving those kinds of artifacts behind? So those kinds of things, I think, are sort of good. And I've been out recently trying to really get people inspired and interested in incident response. Hopefully this Q&A session is helping some of that. Also on my, if you go to the slides.dfirmat.com, you can look at some of my previous talks. I've given one called Becoming an IR Superstar. Have a look at that. That's really the core skills that you want to focus on. And there's a bunch of hyperlink things Everything I think I've linked to out there is absolutely free to download, use, whatever. I'm always a proponent of creating low barriers to entry for anybody I talk to. So a lot of great open source and, again, free options out there. And also for anybody looking to learn CyberChef, if you go to workshops.dfirmat.com, that will give you the a 2-hour workshop you can sit down, work through. You're just using CyberChef, download, extract the zip file. There's a handful of files in there. The text file is the lab guide. Also, I see in the chat somebody linked to Becoming an IR Superstar. Unfortunately, that one recording that is posted online is incomplete. They had problems with the audio. Apparently, the batteries in the mic died about a third of the way through my talk there. So it's not the best sample, but that there's a little bit of it out there. I keep hoping that sooner or later, some of the other places I've given that talk will release the video for that. And also for anybody that's was really hoping to see this talk, there should be video on YouTube for B-Sides Dayton. And I gave this exact talk there. So hopefully that's a good resource for anybody who might feel like they're missing out. And see here. Are you seeing any new types of malicious email or phishing email that have become more challenging than others to investigate? We describe what they were and what made them new or different. I think the biggest challenge when it comes to investigating email is that a lot of places are essentially farming out their mail services to Microsoft 365 or Google's G Suite and using Google Mail services. And why that makes it a challenge is attribution is incredibly hard to begin with. I maybe neglected to make that point previously, but if if you're trying to attribute things, it was a lot easier back when you could just look at the mail headers and identify the origin IP address and figure out it's probably some compromised web server or some compromised server on the internet that threat actors are pivoting through. It's the kind of thing you could very simply block. And now it makes it really hard because you have limited visibility. When you look at mail headers, you really only see that hop from Google or Microsoft as an example to where it hit your mail servers. And so, yeah, you might be able to prove out that it was indeed sent through one of those services. You might even be able to sort of geolocate the IP address where Google or Microsoft was and hope that, you might, that the person wasn't proxying their connection through like a VPN, for example, or some other method to obscure their email address. So you might get a rough idea of the geography, but that's really still not something you can pinpoint and identify the specific threat actor. I think really a lot of the stuff that we see within email, though, a lot of it's still the same. Again, the concerns are malicious links, malicious attachments. Sometimes those things have changed up a little bit. What I like to do, though, I know this is a little bit off the topic, but what I like to do is I like to look at EXIF properties for some of those files, attachments, and those sort of things. And here's a pro tip for anybody watching. If you can identify like an author, you can pour through things and figure out like an email address or some sort of a host name or something like that. Go out and VirusTotal. You can actually search, and VirusTotal just gets better and better in terms of hanging on to that metadata, those details that you can then look up, and sometimes you can see a historically what those actors may have done or used. So those are my, again, off the top of my head, my best email tips for everybody doing incident response. I gave a talk a really long time ago called Phishing Forensics. Is it just suspicious or is it malicious? A lot of that holds up. Some of it's outdated because that was years ago. One of the other challenges is that, back in the time I was giving that, we didn't have quite nearly the privatized WHOIS data for domain registrations. So it was a little easier to figure out who to contact and identify things. Now that's going private. It's far less useful than it once was. You should still check it though. And if you're blessed to have a service that you're already using that has historic details on domain registrations, WHOIS data, that sort of thing, can be incredibly helpful. See here. Got another question. Is it possible to be a good incident responder on the job or learn simply by reading and or watching videos, or do you really have to take formal courses, which all seem to be very expensive? So a great question. Experience definitely helps, but really time in the seat is the best way to get good incident response. I really think you don't necessarily have to have professional experience or have to do expensive courses to learn it and get good at it. So there's some great resources out there specific to incident response. ENISA with the European Union actually puts out some great technical workshop content online for free for anybody. So these are sort of low resource, not resource intensive at all, virtual machines you can download. You can download the lab guides, both the student guide and the instructor guide. You can work through those absolutely for free, and that's a great way to get hands-on experience. If you have access to like an enterprise subscription to VirusTotal, you can download the samples from them. So if you go out there, look for some bad things, you can actually download them, analyze them. Just have to be really careful about that. When you do that kind of thing, what I always tell people is make sure you have a dedicated volatile sandbox, something completely isolated. Last thing you want to have happen is you infect your own network or start becoming a pivot point to blast malware or attacks on the internet at large. So you have to be really careful about it. But by all means, have a look at some bad stuff. So I would definitely recommend those as really some good resources, particularly on defensive security, incident response. The other thing you can do is if you read up on blog posts and so forth, there's some great breakdowns on, for example, people that have reversed malware, for example. There are also sometimes people will upload to GitHub, samples of bad stuff. Again, you just have to be really careful when you're looking at it. But generally speaking, the more you can do, the better off. And so I've, been working pretty hard at sort of, helping people understand incident response and things to do. And so, some of the slide decks referenced earlier, hopefully would be helpful. So yeah, I think, to be honest, I've never had I can't think of formal courses I've had on incident response. I sort of mostly self-taught and learned a lot as I've gone. Now I've got a lot of experience before doing information security. I did systems administration for a number of years. And so being a security-minded system administrator really did help me a lot. And then also doing things like email administration, I got used to looking at up to that point in time, almost every kind of email attack there was. So hopefully that's helpful. And again, definitely take a look at my Becoming an IR Superstar slide deck. It's got a lot of good information in there. Let's see here. Thank you. Any final words of wisdom for information security analysts who want to be a pen tester or work in a SOC as an incident responder? So I hate talking about all my previous talks, but I did put together a talk called Continuous Skills Improvement for Everyone. It's several years old, but honestly, I did put a lot of my best advice in there. You can find that talk on YouTube if you search on that for my last name, and if you search on continuous skills or skills improvement, you should have a little trouble finding it. But really, that's I put that talk together, one for people trying to break into a particular career or role, but also to help people that maybe are looking to advance or further their careers. And again, some of the information probably out of date, but most of it, I would say the bulk of it, is still very applicable today. So give that a look. But really, I think the biggest thing that I tell people is just never stop learning and just continue looking at stuff. And keep an eye on things. Seek out information around breaches. Learn all you can about that. And again, if you find good articles, and there's ton of places out there. A lot of the vendors actually have good articles on sort of their analysis on things, looking at those kinds of things. And again, if you go to workshops.dfiremat.com, I've got the Cyber Chef workshop. I've also got a Wireshark workshop that you can use to learn some of those critical and core skills about incident response. So yeah, the more you do, the better you get. If you're trying to break in, I tell people a lot. It becomes a conundrum of how do I get experience without a job, and how do I get a job without experience? Fortunately, bug bounty programs have a very low barrier to entry, as long as you can usually identify yourself for tax purposes. That most bug bounty programs welcome just about anyone of any experience level. And it's not that I anticipate people making a ton of money doing bug bounty stuff. My point is that it gives you professional experience that you can then put on your resume, and you can use that as, again, professional experience. And so even if you had trouble finding a job, if you can speak to, well, hey, look, I wrote this report, had this finding, I wrote this white paper, maybe if it even resulted in the CVE being created, those are the things you can do to put professional experience on your resume, even if you don't have a formal day job doing it. So hopefully that's helpful for folks. And so I appreciate looking in the chat that people are, giving good feedback. I'm glad that this information is helpful to people watching. And again, sort of apologies that couldn't get screen sharing working on a talk that's very live demo heavy. It's sort of disappointing for me personally, but hopefully this has been good interaction with everyone, and hopefully this has been educational for folks.
I did put out a last poll asking, have your company had any serious incidents the past 12 months? And most of the companies have not. So the follow-up question to you, Matt, would be, when those companies have an incident, what is the first thing they should think about doing?
So when you have an incident, the first thing you need to think about doing is refer to your incident response plan, and hopefully you have one. If you don't have an incident response plan, start on that as soon as you can, and really preparing for those things. is vitally important. You could probably search online and find some example incident response plans, modify them to meet your specific environment and what that looks like. The other thing to do that I would recommend is, once you have your incident response plan, do some tabletop exercises. And what I recommend is that you have two groups for tabletop exercises. One group should be your management and leadership change, and and your communications folks. So those should be, for example, executive management, the managers for security. Those should be your PR folks, whether that's in-house or third party. Whoever's doing your corporate communications should be involved. Your legal counsel, whether it's, again, somebody in-house or somebody you have on retainer. I definitely recommend having that as one group. The other group should be your technical folks that are looking at it from the technical side, not just the communications, the decisions, and so forth. There should be a very small subset from that first group and the second group. And typically the fewer, it shouldn't be all the same people in most instances, but there should be a few that have seen the tabletop from both ends. Because that's another way you can help identify gaps within your incident response. So be prepared ahead of time is really my message here. So if you can be prepared, and then it doesn't be a question of, oh, we've been breached, what do we do? And again, that might be stuff you have in-house. That might be third-party services that you're using for that kind of stuff. And so, I can't stress enough, the more prepared you are, the better ready you are to handle things. And also, it doesn't eliminate it completely. Believe me, I've been in this situation where, something doesn't work the way it's supposed to when you get to real life. But the fewer of those things that you have, I think the better. So, yeah, hopefully that is helpful. But again, when you're ready for it, you need to let decision makers know. You need to investigate and figure out what happened. Again, it's important that somebody sort of manages or coordinates the incident for the technical folks that are digging into, trying to answer the who, what, where, why, when, and how questions. That is really what incident response does. Is answer those type of questions. And again, need to make sure that you're being compliant, whatever the legal requirements are for, for example, breach notifications, what the parameters are, and so forth. That becomes important. Again, doing those kinds of tabletops will help with that. Being prepared will help for that. Making sure you have the policies outlined, that they've been looked over, and that you can kind of vet those things out and make sure that they are up to standards when it comes to being prepared and being ready. So when something does happen, it's not everybody running around going, oh no, it looks like a breach, what do we do? You should already have something ready to go. That's not to say that you have to follow things line item by line item and you can only stay within these parameters. You can't really box yourself in. You have to have sometimes go where the investigation leads you. There needs to be a little bit of fluidity with being able to adapt, to any particular situation. But by and large, for the most part, should have a pretty good idea what you're doing before you need to do it. Seen some great resource shares out there in the chat, so good stuff.
Perfect. I think that concludes this session. Thank you, Matt, and thank you for watching.
Yep. Thank you very much for having me, HackCon Online. Apologies for the technical difficulties and not being able to get screen share working, but hopefully this has been helpful. I really appreciate the chance to chat with everyone. Actually, I see somebody does have a hand raised.
Does that mean that you have a question, Vidar? Or just waving goodbye, probably.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Wasn't sure if we had a question there, but thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for now.